everyone, and welcome back to the Be Ready for Anything podcast from ToolsGroup. I'm your host, Katie Van Adsen, and today I'd like to introduce you to one of our senior consultants, Tommaso Chierchia. Tommaso has been with ToolsGroup for over 6 years and is an expert in supply chain, offering strategic guidance to the worldwide network of ToolsGroup resellers, distributors, and consulting teams. Thanks for talking to me today, Tommaso. How's it going?
Very good. Hi, Katie. Thank you.
Sure. So I wondered if you could start off by giving me an overview of the three main types of supply chain risk that companies are facing in the COVID era.
Absolutely, I can try. We see a lot of disruptions these days with COVID, and if we try to summarize maybe three big areas of risks, we tend to divide the world in kind of demand, fulfillment, and replenishment, and we definitely see risks across these three spectrums. On the demand side, I think it's pretty obvious that simply there's unprecedented shifts in demand, and any automated statistical engine is probably struggling to capture and to react to. So that's a big problem right now. And coupled with that, we see a lot of our customer base that really is struggling to really capture new and last minute information from as many stakeholders as possible. So possibility to collaborate in real time is not always there, and this is another risk when there's really unprecedented shifts in demand. And this obviously then trickles down to planning, and really we see that it's having an effect on how people plan their stock, and a lot of companies are not able to really react and adjust to these sudden shifts in demand. And often this leads to really incorrect stock targets. We see that safety stocks levels that were set previously based on kind of a more stable statistical signal now might be not the correct ones. And lastly, this obviously has an impact on how people replenish and do supply planning. And so all of a sudden, with incorrect stock targets, people need to kind of do firefighting and change their replenishment plans. And so really the risks here now is that you want to have visibility from your tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers as soon as possible, and depending on whether there was good or bad collaboration previously, there might be an enhanced risk of not having tight communication right now. So these are really three big risk factors that we've been seeing in the last months.
I see. And how are you advising companies to adapt to these risks?
Well, I don't think there's a one solution fits all, but in general, what we've been trying to recommend is really to mitigate the manual firefighting, meaning, the first reaction usually to that companies have is to really all of a sudden, if you have a statistical engine that might not be ready or suited for these shifts in demand, people try to intervene manually, and maybe to some degree some of that might be needed because there is urgency to intervene, but it cannot be done systematically. So really the recommendation is to capture the low-hanging fruit where you can intervene manually, but then really intervene more systematically and do proper modeling, parameterization, and leverage on really technology, so that your statistical engine can be corrected and tweaked.
And since this crisis began, have you come across any companies that you've seen being particularly effective in trying to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, I think it slightly goes back to this point that I just made. The companies that we feel are doing better are the ones that really strategize on what are the priorities are, and meaning they were able to assess the situation consult and then intervene, meaning they had to put in place they had to intervene to some extent manually, but then they kind of sat down with us to understand what could be done to kind of fix whatever tool they have in place, right? What are the modules or the formulas that we have at our disposal to revert course of action and limit the damage, right? You cannot expect people to kind of go from a fully automated planning solution, which is what we advocate for, to a full manual intervention. At some point, you have to intervene, and the companies that are intervening sooner, we think, are kind of the ones that probably manage to limit more of the damages. And I can offer more specific example of the type of intervention that they might have put in place if it's of interest.
Yeah, sure.
Well, there's depending on the type of issue and depending on whether a company is facing a surge in demand or a drop in demand, but assuming the majority is kind of facing a drop in demand. One thing, one of the simplest solution was really to offer easy collaboration platforms, right? And that's really to kind of help with, let's say, the manual firefighting. And these are kind of collaboration tools. You can call them kind of Excel on steroids, where a large group of stakeholders can provide inputs in real time, and people can share information. And so kind of that allows you to quickly deviate from a statistical engine, but at least capture information from a wide range of sources. These are web and user-friendly portals, very easily put in place and accessible, and that partially just helps capturing their information. This can be done both on the demand side, so people kind of providing input and last-minute notification on what they believe the latest demand trends are, but also with suppliers. And so all of a sudden, a lot of suppliers are struggling to really meet the requirements of a lot of customers, and so knowing where the risks are, which stock will and will not be available is key, because then you can plan accordingly and you can do rebalancing and reshifting of stock. So that's an example. We did put in place kind of these quick and user-friendly platforms, and people have been using them. And then there's kind of more systematic interventions. And so really we're kind of revising some of our stocking policies, for example. Some people some companies that were used to working with fixed days of coverage in terms of stock policy or fixed number of units have shifted to something that is a little bit more service level driven. So it's a little bit more automated, and it doesn't really require people to do analysis and tweak the system. It's more automated. It looks at demand patterns and adjust automatically, and it allows you to probably have an optimal stock mix rather than kind of work with heuristics or something a little bit more basic.
And as you see companies beginning to make these changes and form these strategies, do you anticipate these adaptations remaining post-COVID, or do you think these are a temporary phase?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think some of these patches are more strictly COVID related, and they're not necessarily things that will be needed in the long run. But there are a number of tools that we think that we've been putting in place that are beneficial for a lot of companies, no matter what. I expect some of these collaboration platforms that I mentioned will, once activated, will be there to stay. I think they only enhance in communication with stakeholders maybe we put them in place now because it was needed more than before, but it's certainly beneficial no matter what. A lot of the automation that we're putting in place simply to be a little bit more reactive to sudden changes in demand are things that we will probably leave in place for the long term.
And my final question for you today is, if you were to talk to a company that is struggling to formulate their supply chain response to the COVID crisis, what's the single most important thing you would advise them to do?
Well, we think that all of these companies have to really assess and consider how to adjust their technology. We really advise to kind of take a step back, try to avoid really trying to work outside of the system, but really try to fix the engine that is driving your supply chain. And so while some, again, manual intervention may be needed, we don't think that is the long-term solution. And at some point, they will revert back to a tool, and it might simply take them more time to react and fix things that were not fixed earlier.
Well, that's great. Thanks again, Tommaso, for talking to me today and for all of this excellent advice.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.